Hi, I'm Danika Herrick.
And I'm Cheryl.
And welcome to another edition of Gorgeous Shiny Things How To Happy Hour.
Tonight's project, by popular demand, is how to paint fabric.
And the cocktail, by popular demand, by us, is the French mojito.
Which is basically a mojito, but doctored up with champagne.
And who doesn't love that?
Very good.
Tonight we're going to be teaching you how to make your own fabric paint, as well as using an array of store-bought ones that we were your guinea pigs for.
And first we need an inspiration, something that you want to put on this fabric. My inspiration are flowers, in honor of spring, so we made a stencil of a peony.
And I love jewelry, and I find a lot of inspiration in it, and I found this piece, and I used it, and I made a stencil of it as well. But besides stencils, we'll also be talking about freehanding and doing a looser kind of watercolory look.
Right.
So first off, we are going to need you to gather your materials. You will need fabric to paint.
And we've chosen cotton, but you can use linens, silks, you know, a variety of different things. But the cottons work the best for your first time around.
And also make sure that it has a good tight weave. You don't want anything with a really loose open weave because it will bleed and it will absorb the paint. And you'll also, it's just not going to be a nice clean edge. But if that's the look you're going for, that's fine. And also have a piece of it available to do samples on, because we just kind of killed this piece with lots of experimenting. So what we're going to do first is make our own homemade paint.
And what you need for the homemade paint is powdered milk and pigments.
Yeah, it's actually a very kind of non-toxic, natural paint that we're making. And I like it because it allows you to create it to the texture and also the color of your liking. If you're going to be doing a stencil, you'd like it to be a little bit thicker. And if you want to do more free-handed painting, you can make it watery, so it kind of bleeds out and is softer on the edges.
Okay, so to make this paint, you're going to need equal amounts of the pigment and the dry mix, and add that to the bowl.
Dry milk, yeah.
The dry milk. And then different ratios of the milk and the milk powder and the pigment will yield either a deeper color if you use more pigment, or will be more waterproof and a lighter color if you use more of the milk powder. So when you start to mix your dried milk and your pigment, you start by just going 1 tablespoon of water at a time.
Yeah, and in this case here, I'm going to show you using this stencil. I actually like to kind of commingle my products. I took this regular milk paint and I wanted it a little bit lighter, so I took some basic white primer because I love my primer. And I just added it to it, and it brought it up from a deep mustard to a light mustard. So what I'm going to do is I'm testing this on a piece of fabric first. This pattern in particular is one that I want to use on the edge of a drapery for a banding, or even it would look great along, I'd say even if you did a pillow kind of around the edge of the pillow, and just kind of flipped it back and forth, and so one went this way, one went that way to kind of create it so it doesn't look like a running drip. But what I'm going to be doing is starting off with the darker color, and I wanted to show you it's really kind of a thick consistency. Have a little pan nearby to tap off your extra, kind of mash it in. Put something protective underneath your fabric. I have a piece of plastic under here. And then line it up and just lightly kind of brush it in. You tap it. Just be careful not to press too hard because you might get some bleeding. But I just kind of like to rub it in and get the majority of the paint off. And then once you get the majority of it off, then you can kind of tamp it on there. And it's also going to, the heavier you do this, the crisper the lines will be. And the lighter, you can make more of a kind of washy look. Okay, so that is the first part of the stencil. And then for the lower half, normally you're going to wait for this to be dry. But you just basically line up your pattern. And I'm going to use the lighter one. And this is a lot thinner, and I just want to give you an example of, you have to be kind of careful with this. I did one over here, and you see the bleeding that happened because it was really wet. So if your product is really wet, you're going to want to squeeze out as much as possible and just lightly kind of go along with the pattern and lightly brush it on. Try and don't push into it too much because you will squeeze the paint out and it will go right underneath the stencil. And
that came out nice.
So that is, I did have a little bleeding. But so if you were going to be doing this, I recommend adding a little bit more milk powder to that to kind of thicken it up. The next product that I want to show you is it's fantastic. It's a spray paint, and who doesn't love spray paint? But it's stencil spray. I picked it up at AC Moore. It comes in metallics, and I picked up the gold. Now, when we first started doing this stencil, we used our peony, and it was working fantastic. But you have to clean this nozzle between every use. Because we let ours sit and it starts just spitting and dripping, and you can see how ugly it gets. And when I went to try it on this velvet pillow, it also has a lot of overspray, so you have to make sure that it's all completely covered. And I actually had draped fabric around it, but some overspray managed to escape into it. But you can see, it looks okay from a distance, but I could see all the drips that were coming out of the nozzle. So it's fantastic. You get a nice clean edge. It comes in, I think that's all like 10 colors in the store. It's about $5 a can, but it works really crisp and clean. And unfortunately, it's clogged right now, and I can't show you how great it is, which is really, it's not that great thing. So anyway, we're going to now do the final thing, and we're going to do, with the fabric paints here, show you how to really make a nice blended color and make it more watercolor. What I'm going to do now is, using the peony stencil, I'm going to use these, the Jacquard paints that I picked up in the store. They are very watery, and you will have some bleeding with this, so you kind of want to make sure that you squeeze out as much of the paint as possible. But what I'm going to do is just fill this whole stencil in with a medium pink. So I'm just kind of lightly brushing and tapping. And do a sample first before you ever do this. Get a piece, this one we're going to make into a pillow, but just get a piece of fabric and sample it and see how bad your bleeding is. And we have a trick to fix the bleeding too, if you happen to get some bad stuff. But I'm just going to go ahead and fill this in. So I've just filled in this entire stencil with just 2 different tones of pinks. Now I'm dipping into my white to bring up a light edge. And I'm going to just kind of, on the very edges of the petal, I'm going to just kind of wash in along the edges. And this is going to kind of create more depth. As you can see, here's my stencil, but what I want to do is just lighten up and kind of give it a more of a hand-painted feel. So certain areas are just going to go bright.
So you just stay on one side of the petal?
Yeah, I'm just doing the very edges, which would normally kind of be coming up out of the flower anyway. And you could also do the same thing and deepen up, like go with a darker color for areas that are going to be kind of receded, like these little in here. I really don't like that color, it's a little brown. I'm going to use a pink and some red here. Squish that around. And that's the thing too, is I just went right over that and it kind of faded out. So you're just going to play around with this, and then when you're happy, which I'm not at the moment, but this is for time's sake, I'm going just to show you. Okay, so you pull it off, and you have a peony.
That's beautiful.
And I had some bleeding happening here, and I got a little bit right there, which I'm going to try to just wipe off with some water, but you basically want to just protect the edges here. But what's great about, if you do have bleeding is, and also for other designs, you could really lose your mind here, but are the fabric markers. And in this case, I don't have a pink, they do make it, I just happened to pick up the Crayolas. These were like $4 for 10 of them. And they set with heat. Yeah, it just says basically place it in the dryer. You can either iron it for 4 minutes or tumble dry for 30 at the hottest setting. But if you also want to just kind of pick up your edges, and you could just outline right here, and to kind of create a little bit more on these little center pops.
So Dana, what was your favorite fabric to use and your favorite paint? You know what,
I love spray paint just in general, and I loved what the spray paint was able to accomplish and how many patterns you could knock off so quickly. I also like this a lot because it gives you that watery feel, although, you know, I don't like how I used a muddy color in there, but minus that, I loved it. Yeah. And what I really like, I like the milk paint. It's a little bit harder to apply after, you know, trying all these different, but it's non-toxic. You have control over the consistency. It's not as, it doesn't bleed as much. But I have to say, I really like the spray paint. I just wish that it came in a better a better can.
Right.
Okay. And then as far as like textures, like we did a different, this is a really nice heavy linen, and it works great for if you have a watery paint because it just absorbs it well. Unlike like when we tried here, this was on a cotton with a wide weave, it bled, but it's also it's a pretty look. I kind of like that washy.
Right. So if you used a different type of a paint, maybe, or a thicker paint or something, would that work better?
Actually, we'll just show you our sample here. We actually played around with the peony. We traced it with a pen and colored it in with a marker for one look. Here's the spray paint toward the end of its life of the can's life, because you could see it started to spit and get really gross. Then we just did some graffiti on here. And then with the same kind of fabric, this is with that fabric paint and the stencil, you have some bleeding. And then here it is with the milk paint, where it's just a little bit crisper, and it actually is the thickest of all of them for the hand of it. This one right here, with this one, is you can't even feel the paint on it. It's just it's nothing. And same thing with the markers and the pen. But the spray paint has a bit of a like a screen printed feel to it. So you just have to play around with the thickness of your fabric and the types of paint. But I recommend, just going out there and just experimenting and trying. Make your own.
And can I have this so I can make a pillow?
You sure can.
Awesome. Great. Thank you. So what are we going to do next week?
Next week we are doing the zebra rug. And this is going to be a lot of fun because it's going to be an actual big zebra-sized rug. But we also have a surprise for you because we're going to be doing a 9x12 area rug that costs less than $25 to make.
Now that's great.
So
I can't wait for that one.
No. Join us next time, though, for the next edition of How To Happy Hour.
And we wish you happy how to.
Yeah. Cheers.